Sarah Martinez wiped the sweat from her forehead as she finished bandaging another soldier's wounded arm. The makeshift medical tent in the Afghan desert felt like an oven, even in the early morning hours. She had been deployed for 6 months. Now and every day brought new challenges that tested her skills as a combat medic. The other soldiers in her unit often looked at her with a mixture of respect and dismissal. They appreciated having someone to patch them up when things went wrong, but many still saw her as just support staff. "Stay in the back, Doc," they would say. "Leave the fighting to us." Sarah had heard these words countless times, and each time they stung a little more. She had joined the military with dreams of making a real difference, of saving lives on the battlefield. Her medical training was extensive, and she could handle trauma situations that would make civilian doctors panic. But despite her skills, she often felt invisible among the combat troops who carried rifles and kicked down doors. Captain Rodriguez approached her tent that morning, his face grim. "Martinez, we're moving out in 20 minutes. Intel says there's a village about 10 miles north where civilians need medical attention. Possible insurgent activity in the area, but nothing we can't handle." Sarah quickly packed her medical supplies, checking her inventory twice. Morphine, gauze, tourniquets, antibiotics. Everything a field medic needed to keep people alive in the worst circumstances. She slung her medical bag over her shoulder and grabbed her sidearm, a pistol she had trained with but never fired in combat. The convoy consisted of 3 armored vehicles carrying 12 soldiers plus Sarah. As they drove through the dusty landscape, she watched the scenery change from barren desert to scattered buildings. The village they were approaching had been caught in crossfire between coalition forces and insurgents for weeks. Sergeant Williams, a gruff veteran with 3 tours under his belt, sat across from her in the vehicle. "Doc, when we get there, you set up your aid station and stay put. We'll clear the area first, then bring you the wounded. Simple as that." Sarah nodded, but something in her gut told her this mission wouldn't be simple at all. She had learned to trust her instincts during her time in Afghanistan. The desert had a way of making even routine operations turn deadly in seconds. As they neared the village, she could see smoke rising from several buildings. The damage looked fresh, and there were no signs of civilian activity. No children playing, no women hanging laundry, no old men sitting in doorways. The silence felt wrong. Their vehicle commander spoke into his radio, coordinating with the other trucks. The plan was straightforward. Establish a perimeter, search for wounded civilians, provide medical care, and extract. Sarah had done similar missions dozens of times, though something about this one felt different. The lead vehicle stopped near what appeared to be the village center. Sarah could see damaged buildings and debris scattered across the narrow streets. Her medical training kicked in as she mentally prepared for what she might encounter. Blast. Injuries, gunshot wounds, burns. She had treated them all before, but as she stepped out of the vehicle, medical bag in hand, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was walking into something much more dangerous than a routine medical mission. The other soldiers spread out with their weapons ready, but their casual movements suggested they weren't expecting serious trouble. Little did any of them know that hidden eyes were watching their every move, and that Sarah's definition of her role as just a medic was about to change forever in the most terrifying way possible. The village felt like a ghost town as Sarah followed her unit through the narrow streets. Broken glass crunched under their boots and the smell of burnt wood filled the air. Captain Rodriguez used hand signals to direct his men, splitting them into 2 groups to search the damaged buildings more efficiently. Sarah found herself assigned to the smaller group led by Sergeant Williams. Besides him, there was Private Chen, a young soldier on his first deployment, and Corporal Davis, who had been making jokes during the entire ride to lighten the mood. Now, in the eerie silence of the village, nobody was laughing. "Doc, set up over there." Williams pointed to a partially collapsed building that still had most of its walls intact. "Good cover, central location. We'll bring anyone we find to you." As Sarah unpacked her medical supplies, she listened to the radio chatter between the 2 teams. The first group had found evidence of recent fighting. Bullet holes, bloodstains, empty shell casings. But no people wounded or otherwise. The village appeared completely abandoned. Private Chen approached her position, his rifle held nervously across his chest. "Ma'am, doesn't this feel weird to you? Like, where is everybody?" Sarah looked up from organizing her supplies. Chen was right to be nervous. In all her previous missions to villages, there were always some civilians around, even in war zones. People had to eat, sleep, take care of their families. Complete abandonment usually meant something bad was coming. "Keep your eyes open, Chen," she advised, checking her sidearm to make sure it was loaded. The weight of the pistol felt heavier than usual against her hip. 20 minutes into their search, Corporal Davis's voice crackled over the radio from a building 2 blocks away. "Found something. Looks like a family hiding in a basement. Woman and 2 kids, all injured. Doc, we're gonna need you over here." Sarah grabbed her medical bag and started toward Davis's location, with Private Chen providing escort. As they moved through the rubble-strewn streets, she mentally prepared for what she might encounter. Malnutrition, dehydration, possibly shrapnel wounds from the recent fighting. They had almost reached the building when the first shot rang out. The bullet struck the wall inches from Sarah's head, sending chips of concrete flying. Chen immediately pushed her down behind an overturned car while shouting into his radio. "Contact! We're taking fire from multiple positions." More shots followed, coming from rooftops and windows around them. Sarah could hear the distinctive crack of AK-47 rifles, a sound she had learned to identify during her deployment. Her heart pounded as she pressed herself against the rusted metal of the car. "Where are they shooting from?" she yelled to Chen, who was trying to spot the enemy positions while returning fire with his M4 rifle. "Everywhere," Chen shouted back. This was a setup. "The whole village is a trap." Through her radio earpiece, Sarah heard chaos erupting across both teams. Captain Rodriguez was calling for immediate extraction, while Sergeant Williams reported that his group was pinned down in a building with no way out. The careful plan had dissolved into a nightmare in seconds. A grenade exploded somewhere nearby, the blast wave making Sarah's ears ring. Chen grabbed her arm and pointed toward a doorway about 30 feet away. "We need better cover." "That building there." They ran together, staying low as bullets whizzed overhead. Sarah had never moved so fast in her life, her medical bag bouncing against her back with each step. They dove through the doorway just as another burst of gunfire erupted from a rooftop across the street. Inside the building, Sarah found herself in what appeared to be an abandoned shop. Dust covered everything, and bullet holes in the wall showed this place had seen fighting before. Chen immediately moved to a window to return fire while speaking rapidly into his radio, trying to coordinate with the rest of their scattered unit. "Doc," Chen called out without taking his eyes off the street. "Private Martinez from the other team is hit bad. They can't move him and they can't get to us. Captain says we're on our own until they can organize a rescue." Sarah's medical training took over, pushing down her fear. If Martinez was seriously wounded, every minute counted. But between her position and the rest of her unit lay open ground swept by enemy fire. Getting to the wounded soldier would mean crossing a kill zone with no protection except speed and luck. As bullets continued to strike the building around them, Sarah realized that her role as just a medic was about to expand in ways she had never imagined. The rifle Chen had been using to return fire lay beside him, and she found herself staring at it with growing understanding of what might be required. The gunfire outside intensified as Sarah crouched next to Private Chen in the abandoned shop. Through the broken window, she could see muzzle flashes from at least 4 different positions. The insurgents had planned this ambush carefully, using the empty village as bait to lure coalition forces into a trap. Chen's radio crackled with desperate voices. "Martinez is losing blood fast," came Corporal Davis's strained voice. "We need the medic here now or we're gonna lose him." Sarah's hands trembled as she checked her medical supplies. She had everything needed to treat a serious gunshot wound, but first she had to reach Martinez alive. The distance between buildings looked like a mile instead of 50 yards. "Chen, can you give me covering fire if I make a run for it?" she asked, surprised by how steady her own voice sounded despite the terror racing through her veins. The young soldier looked at her with wide eyes. "Doc, that's suicide. They've got that whole street covered. You'll never make it across." Another burst of automatic gunfire struck their building, sending plaster raining down from the ceiling. Sarah could hear Captain Rodriguez on the radio, calling for air support that wouldn't arrive for at least 20 minutes. Too long for Martinez to survive a severe wound. "There's got to be another way," Chen muttered, scanning the street through his rifle scope. "Maybe we can find a back route, go around the block." Sarah was considering this option when she heard a new sound that made her blood run cold. Footsteps on the roof above them, followed by voices speaking in a language she didn't understand. The enemy wasn't content to keep them pinned down. They were moving to surround the building. "Chen, we've got company upstairs," she whispered, pointing toward the ceiling where dust was falling from the footsteps above. The young soldier's face went pale. He spoke into his radio in urgent whispers, but the response wasn't encouraging. Both Captain Rodriguez and Sergeant Williams were pinned down in their own positions and couldn't provide assistance. Sarah and Chen were truly on their own. A grenade rolled through the doorway they had entered through. "Grenade!" Chen shouted, grabbing Sarah and diving toward the back of the shop. The explosion was deafening, filling the air with smoke and debris. When Sarah's hearing returned, she realized Chen wasn't moving. Blood seeped from a gash on his forehead where shrapnel had struck him. He was breathing but unconscious, his rifle lying beside him in the rubble. Sarah quickly checked his pulse and pupils. Concussion, possible skull fracture, but alive. Now she was alone in a building surrounded by enemy fighters, with an unconscious soldier to protect and another dying teammate she couldn't reach. The weight of her medical bag felt insignificant compared to the weight of Chen's rifle when she picked it up. Sarah had qualified with the M4 during basic training, but that felt like a lifetime ago. She checked the safety and magazine the way her instructors had taught her, muscle memory taking over where conscious thought failed. The weapon felt foreign and familiar at the same time. Voices echoed from the stairwell leading to the upper floor. The insurgents were coming down to finish what the grenade had started. Sarah positioned herself behind an overturned table, rifle aimed at the stairway entrance, and tried to control her breathing the way she had been taught. Her radio crackled one more time with Martinez's location. He was in a building across the street behind enemy lines, bleeding out while his teammates tried desperately to keep pressure on his wounds. Every instinct Sarah had developed as a medic screamed at her to reach him, to save his life. But first, she had to survive the next few minutes. The first insurgent appeared at the bottom of the stairs, assault rifle raised and scanning the smoke-filled room. Sarah's finger found the trigger, and for the first time in her military career, she wasn't thinking about healing someone. The line between medic and soldier was about to disappear forever, and Sarah Martinez was about to discover that sometimes saving lives requires taking them. The young woman who had joined the military to help people was seconds away from learning that in war, being just a medic was never just anything. Through the smoke and chaos, she could still hear Martinez's teammates calling for help over the radio. Her patient was dying, and she was the only one who could save him. But first, she had to become something she never thought she would be. Time seemed to slow as Sarah aimed at the insurgent coming down the stairs. Her heart hammered against her ribs, but her hands remained steady. All those hours of weapons training that she had considered secondary to her medical studies suddenly became the most important education of her life. The insurgent spotted Chen's unconscious form first, then swung his rifle toward Sarah's position. She squeezed the trigger 3 times in rapid succession, just as her instructors had taught her. The man dropped, his weapon clattering across the floor. Sarah stared at what she had done, shock washing over her in waves. She had taken a life. The hands that had saved dozens of wounded soldiers had just killed someone. But there was no time to process this reality. More footsteps echoed from the stairwell. She grabbed Chen under his arms and dragged him toward the back of the shop, her medical bag bouncing against her hip. The young soldier was starting to regain consciousness, groaning and trying to focus his eyes. Blood still seeped from his head wound, but he was alive. "Chen, stay down and don't move," Sarah whispered, checking his pupils again. Definite concussion, but no immediate signs of brain trauma. She quickly bandaged his head wound while keeping one eye on the stairwell. 2 more insurgents appeared, moving more cautiously this time. They had heard the gunfire and knew their companion was down. Sarah held her breath, rifle ready, waiting for a clear shot. Her medical training had taught her about human anatomy. She knew exactly where to aim to stop someone quickly. The first insurgent moved into the open, and Sarah fired again. This time she felt nothing except grim satisfaction that the threat was eliminated. The second man retreated up the stairs, shouting to his companions in their native language. Chen was now conscious enough to hold his rifle, though his hands shook badly. "Doc, what's happening?" "Where are we?" "We're in deep trouble," Sarah replied, reloading her weapon with movements that were becoming more natural by the minute. "But we're alive, and that's what matters right now." Her radio crackled with an update that made her stomach drop. Martinez had stopped responding to his teammates' calls. Either he was unconscious from blood loss or worse. Sarah had perhaps minutes to reach him before it was too late. "Chen, can you move? We need to get to Martinez." The young soldier struggled to his feet, using the wall for support. "I think so, Doc, but how are we going to get across that street?" Sarah looked through the broken window at the killing field between buildings. Enemy positions were clearly visible now. Rooftops, windows, doorways. At least 8 fighters that she could count, all with clear lines of sight across the street where Martinez lay dying. Then she noticed something that sparked an idea. The building they were in connected to the next structure through a damaged wall. If they could move through the connected buildings, they might be able to reach a position across from Martinez without exposing themselves to the main ambush sites. "Follow me," Sarah said, shouldering her medical bag and keeping her rifle ready. "We're going building to building." They moved through the hole in the wall into what had been a family's home. Children's toys lay scattered among the debris, covered in dust and broken glass. Sarah pushed down thoughts about the family that had lived here, focusing only on reaching her patient. The next building required climbing through a window, then crawling across a floor littered with rubble. Chen moved slowly, still affected by his concussion, but he kept up. Sarah found herself constantly scanning for threats, her rifle ready to fire at any movement. By the time they reached the 4th building, Sarah could hear Martinez's teammates clearly through a broken wall. Corporal Davis was trying to keep the wounded soldier conscious while applying pressure to what sounded like a chest wound. "Martinez, stay with us." "Doc is coming!" Davis's voice was strained with desperation. Sarah peered through a crack in the wall and saw them. Davis and another soldier crouched in a doorway about 20 feet away, with Martinez lying between them in a growing pool of blood. The wound was serious, possibly fatal without immediate treatment. But between Sarah and her patient, 2 insurgents had positioned themselves with perfect angles to shoot anyone who tried to cross the gap. They seemed to know exactly where the wounded soldier was and were using him as bait to draw out more coalition forces. Sarah realized that her medical training alone wouldn't save Martinez. She would have to eliminate the threats first, then provide medical care. The woman who had been dismissed as just a medic was about to prove that sometimes the most important medical procedure was clearing the way to the patient. She checked her ammunition and looked at Chen, who was gripping his rifle with determination despite his injury. Together they would have to fight their way to their wounded teammate. And Sarah was no longer thinking of herself as anything other than a soldier with medical skills. The transformation was complete. She was no longer just a medic who carried a weapon. She was a warrior who happened to be trained to save lives. Sarah studied the positions of the 2 insurgents blocking their path to Martinez. One was hidden behind a concrete barrier about 15 feet away, while the other had taken position in a 2nd-story window with a clear view of the street. Both locations provided excellent fields of fire that would cut down anyone trying to reach the wounded soldier. "Chen, can you see the guy in the window?" Sarah whispered, pointing upward. The young soldier squinted through his rifle scope, still fighting the effects of his concussion. "Yeah, I got him. But Doc, I don't know if I can make the shot. My vision's still pretty messed up." Sarah made a decision that would have seemed impossible to her just hours earlier. "I'll take the window. You focus on the barrier position. We move on 3, okay?" She positioned herself for the best angle on the 2nd-story target, her medical training helping her understand exactly how the human body would react to her shots. The steady hands that had performed countless procedures under pressure now gripped a rifle with growing confidence. 1, 2, 3. Both weapons fired simultaneously. Sarah's target dropped from the window while Chen's shot forced the insurgent behind the barrier to duck for cover. Without hesitation, Sarah sprinted toward Martinez's position, her medical bag bouncing against her back. Bullets whined past her head as she dove through the doorway where Davis and the other soldier were sheltering. Martinez lay motionless between them, his uniform soaked with blood from a chest wound that was clearly life-threatening. "How long has he been unconscious?" Sarah asked, immediately checking for a pulse while assessing the wound. "About 2 minutes, Davis replied. "Lost a lot of blood, Doc. I've been trying to keep pressure on it, but..." Sarah's medical training took over completely. The gunshot wound had penetrated Martinez's left lung, causing it to collapse. Without immediate treatment, he would die within minutes. She needed to perform a chest tube insertion under combat conditions, a procedure she had practiced hundreds of times but never while under enemy fire. "Keep pressure here," she instructed Davis. positioning his hands over the wound. Chen, watch that barrier position. The guy you shot at is still alive. Working with swift, precise movements, Sarah opened her medical kit and prepared for the emergency procedure. She had performed chest tube insertions in field hospitals, but never while bullets were flying overhead. Her hands remained steady as she cleaned the insertion site and prepared the tube. The sound of approaching footsteps made her look up. More insurgents were moving toward their position, having heard the gunfire. Their temporary advantage was disappearing quickly. "How much longer, Doc?" the other soldier asked nervously, scanning the street for threats. 2 minutes if you keep them off me, Sarah replied, making the incision between Martinez's ribs. Blood and air escaped from the wound as his collapsed lung began to reinflate. The procedure was working, but Martinez was still unconscious from blood loss. A grenade landed in the street outside their doorway, exploding close enough to shower them with debris. Sarah shielded Martinez's body with her own while continuing to work. The chest tube was almost in position, but she needed just a few more seconds. Chen fired several shots from his position, forcing advancing insurgents to take cover. "They're getting closer, Doc." "Whatever you're doing, do it faster." Sarah secured the chest tube and immediately started an IV line to replace Martinez's lost blood. His pulse was weak but steady, and his breathing was improving as the collapsed lung reinflated. The immediate medical crisis was under control, but they were still trapped in a building surrounded by enemy fighters. "He's stable for now," Sarah announced, "but we need to get him out of here. He needs surgery within the hour or we'll lose him anyway." Davis spoke into his radio, calling for immediate evacuation. Captain Rodriguez's voice came back with bad news. The landing zone was too hot for helicopter extraction. They would have to fight their way to a safer location before medical evacuation could be attempted. Sarah looked at her patient, then at her rifle. Martinez was alive but couldn't be moved safely until they cleared a path through the enemy forces surrounding them. The woman who had once been content to stay in the back and patch up wounds was now the only person capable of both fighting their way out and keeping Martinez alive during the extraction. "Can Martinez be moved?" Chen asked, reloading his weapon as more enemy voices echoed from nearby buildings. Sarah checked the chest tube and IV line. "If we're careful and keep him horizontal. But someone needs to monitor his breathing constantly, and we'll need covering fire the entire way." She realized that she would have to do both, provide medical care and fight their way to safety. The rifle felt natural in her hands now, no longer a foreign tool but an extension of her will to save lives. Sometimes saving a patient meant eliminating the threats trying to kill him. As insurgent forces began their final assault on the building, Sarah Martinez prepared to prove that being just a medic meant being ready to do whatever it took to bring her people home alive. The sound of boots on gravel told Sarah that insurgents were closing in from multiple directions. Martinez was breathing steadily now, but moving him would be dangerous and slow. They needed a plan that would get them to the extraction point while keeping her patient alive. "Davis, you and Thompson carry Martinez," Sarah ordered, checking her rifle ammunition. "Chen, even with that concussion, you're still our best shot. Cover our rear. I'll take point and clear the path." The other soldiers stared at her with surprise. 6 hours ago, Sarah had been the quiet medic who stayed behind cover while others did the fighting. Now she was giving tactical orders and preparing to lead them through a combat zone. "Doc, are you sure about this?" Davis asked. "Maybe one of us should take point." "I know where we need to go. I know Martinez's medical condition and I can shoot," Sarah replied firmly. "Right now, I'm the best option we have." She studied their route through a crack in the wall. The extraction point was 3 blocks away, requiring them to cross 2 streets and navigate through several damaged buildings. Enemy forces controlled most of the high ground, but Sarah had identified a path that used cover effectively. "We move fast but careful," she continued. "Stop for nothing except if Martinez's breathing changes. If I go down, Chen takes over medical care. Questions?" There were none. The transformation was complete. Her teammates were now following her lead without question. Sarah checked Martinez one final time. His pulse was stronger, and the chest tube was functioning properly. He had regained consciousness briefly, long enough to squeeze her hand and whisper, "Thanks, Doc," before drifting back into a pain medication haze. "Let's move," Sarah said, stepping through the doorway with her rifle raised. The first 50 yards went smoothly, using the connected buildings to avoid exposure. But reaching the street crossing required passing through an area where enemy snipers had clear sight lines. Sarah spotted muzzle flashes from two positions, one on a rooftop, another in a window across the street. She made a decision that would have terrified her earlier that day. "Wait here. I'm going to clear those positions." Before anyone could protest, Sarah was moving. She used doorways and debris for cover, advancing in short rushes toward the first sniper position. Her medical knowledge of human anatomy guided her shots. She knew exactly where to aim for instant incapacitation. The rooftop sniper never saw her coming. 2 precise shots and the threat was eliminated. The second position proved more challenging, requiring Sarah to circle around a building and approach from an unexpected angle. Her military training had covered urban combat, but she had never imagined using those skills in real combat. 5 minutes later, she signaled for her team to move. Davis and Thompson carried Martinez between them, while Chen provided rear security. Sarah led them across the street and into the next block, constantly scanning for new threats. They were halfway to the extraction point when Martinez's breathing changed. "Stop!" Sarah called out, immediately checking her patient. The chest tube had shifted during transport, partially blocking his airway. In a normal medical setting, this would be a minor adjustment. In the middle of a firefight, it could be fatal. "Set him down," Sarah ordered, dropping her rifle to work on Martinez. Her hands moved quickly to reposition the chest tube while enemy voices echoed from nearby buildings. The insurgents were tracking their movement and closing in. "Doc, we got movement on both sides," Chen reported, his voice tight with pain and concentration. Sarah's hands worked steadily on Martinez while her mind processed the tactical situation. They were exposed in the middle of a street with hostile forces approaching from 2 directions. Martinez needed medical attention that required her full focus, but without security, they would all be dead in minutes. "Davis, take my rifle," she said without looking up from her patient. "Thompson, you've got the radio. Call Captain Rodriguez and tell him we need immediate support at this location." As she worked to stabilize Martinez's breathing, Sarah could hear gunfire erupting around them. Her teammates were fighting to protect her while she fought to save Martinez's life. The irony wasn't lost on her. The woman they had once told to stay in the back was now the center of their defensive perimeter. Martinez's breathing improved as the chest tube aligned properly. His eyes opened, focused, and found hers. "Doc, did we make it?" "Not yet," Sarah replied, checking his pulse. "But we're going to. I promise." She picked up her rifle just as insurgents appeared at the end of the street. The final push to the one extraction point would require everything she had learned about being both a medic and a soldier. Martinez was stable enough to move, but barely. One wrong step, one missed threat, and all her medical work would be meaningless. Sarah Martinez, who had been dismissed as just a medic 12 hours earlier, was about to lead her team through the most dangerous part of their journey home. She was no longer thinking about her role or her limitations. She was thinking about bringing her people home alive no matter what it took. The extraction point was visible now, a cleared area where helicopters could land just 2 blocks ahead. But between Sarah's team and safety lay the most dangerous part of their journey. Insurgents had realized where they were heading and were moving to cut off their escape route. "Thompson, what's the word on air support?" Sarah asked while checking Martinez's chest tube one final time. "Inbound in 3 minutes, Doc. But the LZ is hot. Enemy forces all around the perimeter." Sarah made her decision quickly. Martinez was stable enough for a final push, but they would need to fight their way through a coordinated enemy assault. The woman who had once been content to treat wounds in safety was about to lead a combat assault while carrying a wounded soldier. "Davis, you and Thompson carry Martinez. Stay between Chen and me. We'll clear the path. When those helicopters arrive, we run for the LZ no matter what's shooting at us." "Understood?" Her teammates nodded. Sarah had become their leader through actions rather than rank, and they trusted her judgment completely. The quiet medic had proven herself in the crucible of combat. They moved toward the final street crossing as enemy fire erupted from multiple positions. Sarah advanced methodically, using every piece of cover while engaging targets with precise economical shots. Her rifle had become as natural in her hands as surgical instruments once had been. Chen, despite his concussion, provided excellent supporting fire from their right flank. The young soldier had found his courage under Sarah's leadership, fighting with determination that surprised even himself. "Contact front," Sarah called out as insurgents appeared in windows overlooking the street. She dropped two with quick, accurate shots while moving to better cover. The enemy had set up a killing field, but Sarah's medical knowledge of anatomy made her devastatingly effective with a rifle. The sound of approaching helicopters grew louder. Sarah could see the first aircraft banking toward their position, but enemy fighters were also converging on the landing zone. The final 100 yards would determine whether they all went home or died together in the Afghan dust. "Move! Move! Move!" Sarah shouted as the lead helicopter touched down. Davis and Thompson ran toward the aircraft with Martinez between them. Sarah and Chen provided covering fire, shooting at enemy positions while moving backward toward the helicopter. Bullets kicked up dirt around their feet, but Sarah's focus remained absolute. Martinez was loaded into the helicopter first, with Sarah immediately climbing in to continue monitoring his medical condition. The chest tube was still functioning, his pulse was steady, and his chances of survival were now excellent with proper surgical facilities awaiting. Chen and the others piled into the aircraft as the pilot prepared for immediate takeoff. As they lifted off, Sarah looked down at the village where everything had changed for her. The woman who had landed there that morning no longer existed. "Doc," Martinez said weakly, gripping her hand as she checked his IV. "They're never going to call you just a medic again." Sarah smiled as she monitored his vital signs during the flight to the field hospital. He was right, but not for the reasons he thought. She wasn't a different person because she had proven she could fight. She was different because she had learned that being a medic meant being ready to do whatever was necessary to save lives. 3 weeks later, Sarah received a commendation for her actions during the ambush. The citation mentioned her medical skills, her tactical leadership, and her courage under fire. But the part that meant the most to her was the final line. Specialist Martinez exemplified the highest traditions of military medicine by demonstrating that a medic's primary weapon is the determination to bring everyone home alive. At the ceremony, Captain Rodriguez approached her with a smile. "Doc, we've got new orders. Another village that needs medical assistance. You interested?" Sarah checked her rifle and shouldered her medical bag. "Let's go help some people, sir." She was no longer just a medic, but not because she had learned to fight. She had learned that being a medic meant being ready to be whatever her patients needed her to be. Sometimes that meant gentle hands and soothing words. Sometimes it meant carrying a rifle and clearing the path to safety. Sarah Martinez walked toward the helicopter with the quiet confidence of someone who had discovered her true calling. She was a healer who would fight for the chance to heal, a soldier who carried bandages instead of extra ammunition, and a leader who measured success not in enemies defeated, but in lives saved. The other soldiers no longer saw her as support staff who stayed safely in the rear. They saw her as the person who would risk everything to bring them home alive, no matter what obstacles stood in her way. In a profession where being just anything meant being underestimated, Sarah had proven that just a medic could be the most dangerous thing on any battlefield, dangerous to anyone who threatened her patients.